There are places in our own hearts and our own histories and our own psychology that we'd just rather not have other people see. We'd rather not see ourselves. And I think for Maurice, Thérèse is this person who says, like, oh, I see you there, and God sees you there, and I don't condemn you, and He doesn't condemn you. In fact, this is the place where He wants to carry out His work in you, and really manifest His glory in you and His mercy.
Praise be Jesus Christ, and welcome back to another episode of CarmelCast. CarmelCast is a production of the Institute of Carmelite Studies Publications. For more information, you can visit our website at www.icspublications.org. My name is Father Pierre Giorgio of Christ the King. I'm joined by Brother John Mary of Jesus Crucified, and a new face to our table, Amelia Castro-Mendoza, an editor here at ICS Publications, has worked for us on and off for a number of years, probably since like 2020-ish, or even before then, I think.
Before.
It was around the
maybe
pandemic.
2020, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, a great friend of our community here in Washington, D.C., and one of our editors here at ICS. And so we're just so happy to finally convince her to come talk on the podcast about this theme that we have for this season, which is a reminder, is all about the relics that are coming to visit St. Thérèse. And so we're coming to, in these episodes, talking about the end of Thérèse's life and kind of the miracles and just sort of what affected her spirituality at the end of her life. And so today we have a topic related to this as well.
Yes. Yeah. So today I was thinking it'd be good for us to talk about one of the, if not maybe the greatest protégé of Saint Thérèse in her little way. And that is a seminarian by the name of Maurice. Eventually he would go on to be a priest. But and this friendship that the two of them had. And depending on how you see Maurice's life, he's perhaps like a great success story of the little way of Saint Thérèse, or he was a great failure. And so that's what I want to get to in the end, is to argue about maybe that topic. But
I have a feeling we're all going to be on the same page with that.
Probably so. But it's really through his life that you can, and through his struggles, that you begin to understand the little way of Saint Thérèse. And so I thought it'd be good for us to talk about in this episode. So maybe we could just start by, kind of talking about the beginning of his life, even before he met Thérèse.
Yeah, so he was born in Normandy, in the similar part of France where Thérèse was born. His mother died a week after he was born, and his father took him to live with his godmother, his aunt, in a little town on the coast of Normandy called La Grune. And he lived there with them. His father fell out of touch with the family, and I think eventually moved to Paris and got married again. But Maurice wasn't aware of his own history until he was about the age of 11, when they told him who his real parents were. And
Mom is not your mom.
Exactly, yeah. and to know that his father was still alive and that he really had no relationship with him. And so I think that was I'm sure for any child, that's a huge kind of crisis of identity. So.
Yeah.
So when he speaks about his father dying when he was 3, he actually means his blood uncle, or not a blood uncle, but his blood aunt's husband.
Yes.
Is who died when he was 3. Mm-hmm. So that was something that I didn't know. So
I think he's never even with Thérèse, I think, quite honest about completely honest about his family history. I think he probably struggled with that.
And sometimes even the correspondence, he refers to his aunt as mom.
Yes.
At that point it had become habitual, even though he acknowledges that his mom died, I think, a week after he was, or 10 days after he was born.
Yeah. And along with the struggles that just this whole crisis of identity brings about in him is also the fact he says in one of the letters that he was the cause of her death, of his mother's death. So that just like the weight of thinking that.
Imagine, he must have done something really bad for his aunt and uncle to tell him that when he was 11 years old.
Yeah. And they were childless, so he was their only child.
Right.
So he didn't have any siblings. So that was his family, his understanding of family.
And it seems like he had a fairly happy childhood, apart from those struggles there, and some wounds that we'll go back to that'll carry on the rest of his life, perhaps. But eventually he kind of had a conversion experience and just discovered a vocation, his desire for serving God, but always kind of in conflict between being pulled by the world and then pulled in this vocation.
Yeah, I'm in the process of reading The Red and the Black, which is a Bildungsroman from actually written in the 1870s, but kind of around this time. And the main character in that book is Julien Sorel, who has this, well, a similar sort of being pulled in two different directions of becoming a priest or becoming a soldier. But just to say, like, at this time, there is kind of a lot of confusion for young men, I guess you could say, with respect to, France has just suffered a military defeat at the hand of Bismarck and the Germans. There is a kind of a sense in which a priestly vocation, a religious vocation for young men was not seen as a favorable thing to pursue. And so he comes face to face with some of this within the context of the beginning of his own, calling and vocation. And we see it from the very beginning, even of his correspondence with Saint Thérèse.
Yeah. And then that brings us then to his kind of reaching out to the Carmel for the first time.
Yeah, I think he hears a story from one of his friends about these Martin sisters that have entered the Carmel, and he gets this idea that he'll write. And I think it's like practice back then, and even today, that you see, seminarians and priests writing for the prayers of a sister in the Carmelite monastery. And so he writes on the feast of Teresa. He's like chosen this auspicious day, and is bold enough to even use that as a weight on the prioress to say, like, are you really going to deny me on the feast of Teresa? Like, I'm invoking her and I feel inspired.
He had experienced a fairly strong moment of conversion as well that led him there. So he felt kind of on shaky ground. It was like a strong conversion, but because of his past life, there was a sort of tension within him. And so he really felt weak because of his past ways, which he'll talk about a lot, but also this new draw to serve God and to enter seminary.
So eventually he has to do his compulsory year of military service, and this is when I think it's Mother Agnes, Therese's sister, Pauline, who kind of hands him over, so to speak, to the little doctor in the Carmel of Lisieux to be his intercessor, pen pal, Although at this point, she's not writing directly back to him. That would come under the next prioress, Mother de Gonzague. But he does, Thérèse immediately writes a prayer. So Thérèse immediately composes a prayer for Maurice, and it's in the collected prayers of Saint Thérèse. It's prayer number 8. And in that prayer, she writes the prayer for Abbé Bellière, which is Maurice's last name. She offers all of the prayers and sacrifices at her disposal for his soul. And she prays too for kind of a recognition. Well, she recognizes that Maurice's and hers souls have been united in a bond of charity. And this comes, I think, from a little badge that Maurice sent along with his first letter. And on the back of that badge, he writes, seal of union in apostolic and fraternal love in the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary. It's kind of signifying really something that he was taking rather seriously, although serious for a 21-year-old man who is about to start living in a barracks, and running to a young woman. He doesn't know that she's young at this point. He actually doesn't find out her age until much later. But certainly we see kind of a naivete, maybe a little bit of, just affect, kind of a lot of affect in his writing to the prioress of Lisieux, asking for an intercessor, asking for a spiritual sister to really intercede on his behalf and help him. And he had no idea what he was getting himself into with the intercessor and the spiritual master that he was about to encounter. Mm-hmm.
And she recounts in Manuscript B, in Story of a Soul, what it was like for Mother Agnes to approach her. I think she was in the laundry maybe, with this opportunity to pray, to take on Maurice as a spiritual brother. And then mentions, yes, his like long silence after. They didn't hear from him for quite some time. It's like 9 months of silence after he receives Thérèse as his spiritual sisters.
Yeah, and maybe here we can also mention, and just to give a sense of how seriously Thérèse took this, because they didn't hear from him for several months. Another soon-to-be ordained priest wrote to the prioress later on, and that was Adolphe Roland, and she was very hesitant when the prioress asked her to take him on as a kind of a spiritual brother, because she had taken so seriously the opportunity, the job, I guess you could say, of taking on Maurice as a spiritual brother, that she said, "Oh, I'm already giving everything to him. Like, how can I split that?" I actually want to read when she talks about this in manuscript C. This is in chapter 11, because she says, "Mother, you read this young priest's letter," this is talking about Abbé Roulon, "in order that I might know exactly what he was asking. My first sentiment was one of joy, which was immediately replaced by fear. I asked you whether obedience could double my merits. You answered that it could, and you told me several things which made me see that I had to accept a new brother without any scruples." And she says, "I hope with the grace of God to be useful to more than 2 missionaries, in fact." And so you can see, I mean, even from the very beginning, Thérèse took this kind of this adoption, this uniting of her prayer and sacrifices for the soul of Maurice, how seriously she took it, so much so that she was almost unwilling to share it with Abbé Roland in the end.
It also might be good to note here what all is going on in Thérèse's life at this time, because this is the end of 1895. So that means Thérèse has really just come upon her discovery of the little way. Mm-hmm. She's offered herself to merciful love, and so now she has this kind of apostolic spirit now of wanting to share this message. So with her own sisters in the community, but also now. This is her outlet in order to share her message of God's mercy and love with a wider audience, even though at this time she's not necessarily writing to them, but through her prayer and sacrifice, being united to them in this way is her way of kind of fulfilling the apostolic zeal of Teresa of Avila and the founding of the Carmelite nuns.
So what do you think makes her correspondence with Maurice then unique in all the correspondence that we have with 2 huge volumes of letters to and from Thérèse?
For me, I think it's that Thérèse understood Maurice as who's going to be her protege. I think she had this intentionality about him. She mentions it several times too towards the end of her life in the last conversations about kind of what she had in mind for Maurice, and I think she's really seeing it as an opportunity, for this sort of apostolic sharing of her message to the first person, and to someone whom she had taken, as I mentioned, very seriously with respect to her charge over him.
Yeah, and Thérèse takes on 2 very different tones with these brothers, and I think because in Maurice she sees very little soul. It draws something out of her, something maternal, and there's an affection there because she experiences the need, his own need, and she's responding to that need.
Yeah, I think she sees she has a captive audience in him. I think because he feels his own neediness, and she doesn't shun that obviously, but teaches him how to understand that according to her little way, and so that she's at this point. Has written, like you said, manuscript B, is coming to a fuller understanding of kind of the mission that's been entrusted to her, and happy, really enthusiastically, wanting to share that, but with a sensitivity, with a really feminine sensitivity, right? With attentive to his needs and his. I mean, it's amazing. She's suffering so much physically at this time, and then also she's experiencing her trial of faith, and yet she's almost silent about her own sufferings, and is just so attentive to his concerns, his worries about his past sins and his future as a missionary. So,
yeah, I think that's an important point. Is that so when he first writes, he's writing to Mother Agnes. Thérèse sees these letters, but she's not replying to him yet. Really, for a whole year, she doesn't reply to him because Mother Agnes is the one who's writing to him. But even in his first letter, you can see that great neediness that he had. It's almost humorous to read this letter, the way he's just very dramatic almost.
I think he may have been somewhat desperate.
Yeah, again, kind of being pulled in these 2 directions of because of his past sins, his past life, perhaps worldly pursuits, and this draw to give his life over to God. And then, like we mentioned, this looking ahead to this time of military service where he's going to be I mean, it maybe sounds kind of strange to us now, right? It's like you have seminarians who have to leave seminary and go off and serve for a year in the military. And he was afraid of that. During that time, he was going to lose his vocation. He's a little veiled about like why that might be the case. Like, what is it? Is it kind of the honor of military life? Is it kind of maybe some of the deviant behavior, that carousing and drunkenness that comes with military service? Like, what is it that's kind of pulling him away? But he's afraid he's going to lose his vocation. And so he's writing to the Carmel to beg for their prayers.
This is one of the reasons why I mentioned that book, that novel by Stendhal, Red and the Black, because of at that time there was a lot of prestige that came, from one versus the other. So much so that I think it seems to me, I mean, so where we can point to this is when he's tempted to go to military school rather than returning to the seminary at the end of his year of conscription. And it seems to me that kind of that fact, while it's still being, he doesn't go to the military school, he goes back to seminary, but the temptation to enter military school seems to point, in my opinion, to a desire for kind of the military honor and what that means and what that would bring him, and maybe even making himself feel more confident in himself. And I think you can look at kind of his desire to write to a nun as sort of a desire for a stronger self, a stronger spiritual self that he feels that he lacks, and is what in his conversion is kind of on shaky ground still. And he wants that second soul to really strengthen his soul and his spiritual kind of growth. And that's being tested, and it's being tested, I think, by that possibility of a more worldly military career.
It's interesting that you see both like this young, kind of bold, maybe a little naive, reckless, desperate kind of Maurice, but you also see like a beautiful faith in this request and thinking, oh, I'm going to write this sister and she's really going to actually help me and keep me kind of grounded in the spiritual life and obtain graces for me. And that represents, I think, a kind of beautiful and childlike faith in itself. And some self-knowledge as well. So there's kind of a little bit, it's kind of paradoxical in a sense, He's young, but he's got some good things going for him. So
yes, I love the part where he writes the first letters and asks for this spiritual sister, and then, like you said, there was like 9 months of silence where they don't hear from him again, and he writes, "I am a soldier, and this time has no value for the seminarian. I have had many a fall, many unheard of stupidities. In the midst of this world which has taken hold of me again, I just committed the most beautiful of all. But it is so powerful that it will be the last, for it is correcting me. I am plunged into a deplorable situation, and my dear sister, Thérèse of the Child Jesus, must tear me away from it at all costs." So he's writing very desperately to ask for her prayers because he's had this beautiful fall.
This most beautiful of stupidities. The editor makes a note that it could have been a plan of renouncing his vocation. And we don't actually know, but there's some indication in later correspondence in letter 177. There's some clues that it's that his most beautiful stupidities is that he's going to enter the military school.
Yeah, I think Bishop Ahern takes another stance.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I haven't read that book in a long time, so
yeah.
fill me in.
Well, he says because it's a blunder he's committed, that it must. He suggests that it maybe is something more of like whether it's drunkenness or something sexual,
moral,
something like that. That maybe he had fallen in some other way because it was a past tense. It was something he had committed, not something he like almost did by going back. He could
recover from it. Like there's still a chance, right?
Yes. Yeah. I just also something that's interesting to me here is even though he struggles so much later on in his correspondence to understand the little way, you can already get like there's little bits of there's like kernels of the little way in what he's saying here because he's not. I mean, he's in a sense grateful for this fall because he says will be his last.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is maybe a little naive, but also there's a certain confidence in that, which I think would resonate very much with Thérèse.
Yeah.
Ultimately, he does not enter the military school, and he returns to seminary. And you get a sense, even in some of his correspondence, that his superiors are not entirely pleased with him because they're putting off any sort of like commitment in terms of what they're going to do with him. And so it seems that there may be something that was known, or maybe it just been just general character faults or whatever it may be. But there's something about this correspondence that he takes up again with Thérèse. And at this point, Thérèse is writing to him by the end of that summer. You begin to see how, I mean, he's sharing some of these correspondences with his spiritual director. I think it's giving him more of a sense of duty and purpose not duty, but a sense of purpose with respect to his vocation, and it's feeding him in his desire to offer himself in charity for the sake of souls. And I think that's coming. I think that's coming from Thérèse. I think he's receiving that strengthening in his correspondence with Thérèse.
Yeah. How was it that he came to actually write to Thérèse, or Thérèse came to write to him? Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. When he first reached out, Mother Agnes was priors, as we talked about, and then Mother Marie de Gonzague was elected just barely in the next community election, and it was she who was receiving the letters and writing back to him. It was a point in time, I think she got sick, and then gave Thérèse the opportunity to write back directly, which was, I think, remarkably broad-minded of Mother Marie de Gonzague to really trust Thérèse. She was hard on Thérèse, but I think she trusted Thérèse too, and she had entrusted the novices to Thérèse at this time as well. So to have this opportunity to correspond directly with Maurice. Yeah,
and this is, I think really we can see God's providence in the fact that, she was sick, so she couldn't reply herself, but also, like you said, that I think this would have been pretty unique to have a young nun writing to a seminarian like this with such freedom, and yet, like you said, there was a great trust there. And so, there was, we can definitely see the trust that Thérèse garnered from her, but also her kind of own open-mindedness about this at a time when it probably wouldn't have been as accepted.
The first letter that she actually is able to write to Thérèse is on October 21st. And it's LT 198 in the collected letters of Thérèse. And all of these letters are found actually in volume 2 of the collected letters, the general correspondence. She says to Maurice, "I'm asking God that you may not only be a good missionary, but a saint, all on fire with the love of God and souls. I beg you to obtain also for me this love, so that I may help you in your apostolic work." And I think this is this being the first letter she writes to Maurice, it takes on this first, and remember this is after she's written manuscript B, it's taking on this first kind of sharing, Thérèse's sharing in that future heavenly apostolic mission that she would have as the patroness to the missions. But
and at this time, Maurice isn't even sure he's going to get to be a missionary.
Right, but
he wants to be a missionary, but he hasn't been
moving
accepted.
in that direction. Yeah, moving in that direction, and she's really saying that not just be a good missionary, but to be a saint. But she invokes Saint Teresa in this great desire that Teresa had, saying she'd give 1,000 lives to save a single soul. And so you begin to see here a uniting of his desire, her desire with his desire to be a missionary. And I think that really strengthens him, or maybe it gives him some kind of confirmation. This nun who I've in my desperation have submitted myself to is asking me to pray for her, so that she can set me on fire and intercede for me in a way that is beneficial to me. And I don't know what he would have thought when he reads this first letter from Thérèse. That's one thing that I always wonder is what is his reaction having read? Oh, she the one who's praying for me actually wrote to me, not the mother.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think they found in each other they were really like-minded in a lot of ways. They had in terms of the desires that they had, the kind of strong desires they had, the desire for that missionary work, that kind of apostolic spirit, and it seems like there was a kind of mutuality in terms of kind of helping each other along in their missions, both her helping him in his concrete missionary work, but also that he becomes part of her mission too in spreading the little way and having another disciple of the little way. So there's a real kind of sharing and reciprocity I think they they kind of see these similar desires. He points out, in some of his letters, he goes through and he points out how they're similar.
Yes.
And I think they both kind of revel in finding a kindred spirit in each other. So
Yeah, there's that great letter. It's in June 7th, 1897, where he goes through and like lists all the ways that he thinks that they're similar with their kind of zealous, the great desires, missionary spirits, like all these things.
They want to be martyrs together, right?
Yes, yeah. Their
loss of a
death of a mother,
loss
father.
of a mother, father, feeling orphaned.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting though that he sees her. I think they both see each other as like kindred spirits, but he sees Thérèse as like so much stronger, and stronger faith than him. And yet, I think what Thérèse is like always doing in her letters is like saying like, "No, brother, like I'm the same as you." She sees her own like. So it's not that his weakness is like calling out to her, in a way of like that she's strong and so she can be there for him who's weak. I think it's that his weakness is calling out to her because that's how she sees herself, as this little soul who's weak and so needy, and that's what she resonates with, and she's having to like constantly try to break him of this idealized version that he has of her.
yes, she writes, "I beg you to believe me that the good God has given you a sister, not a great soul, but one who is very little and very imperfect." So she always does emphasize that for him, because she gets sad when he has these misperceptions of who he thinks she is, and she wants him to really know that she is a little soul.
And remember when this is all happening. This is was the last episode of Trial of Faith. Did we talk? Is that the yeah? So in our last episode we spoke about our brother spoke about Thérèse going through this trial of faith, and that's this correspondence is happening during that time. Another one I'll pull for you. She says, "If for a few moments you could read into my soul, how surprised you would be. The thought of heavenly bliss not only causes me not a single bit of joy, but I even ask myself at times how it will be possible to be happy without any suffering." So she's struggling with this idea of so heaven after death, her suffering ends. And that's really the only thing that is at this point in her life that she really has to hang her hat on to really grasp on substantively too. It's kind of the crux of one aspect of her struggle with this trial of faith. And she says, "You would be surprised if you could really see what I'm going through and what's going on interiorly in me."
And that's why this correspondence is so important. This is something similar that happened when Thérèse is sharing manuscript B with her sister Marie. Her sister misunderstands the little way and thinks, well, like, Thérèse, that's for you. You're a very strong soul. You have great faith, great love. Like, I don't have those desires within me. And so Thérèse has to write this letter to her to correct her and say, like, no, my soul is the same as yours. I'm weak. I'm little as well. This is the same sort of thing that we have going on back and forth here with Thérèse and Maurice. In fact, sometimes they're arguing, right, about who's the littlest of souls.
Yes. And could you just touch on, like, because I think she is reminding him of her own imperfections and poverty, because it's something that he brings up constantly. He has this constant struggle with his past sin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He, over and over again, it's like every letter, he mentions, like, this past sinful life that he led. He doesn't go into any details, but it is funny. He'll say, like, oh, well, when you get to heaven, you're going to see, like, you're going to know these things about me, and then you won't love me as much anymore. And she's like, no, I'll love you all the more because of those things. But he continues to struggle with that. And it's like every letter she's having to correct him and say, like, these things are not a hindrance to God's love and mercy for you.
Sure. I think all of us can relate a little bit, at least, to Maurice's struggle, even if it's not, we're like every single letter kind of putting it on display. That there are places in our own hearts and our own histories and our own psychology that we'd just rather not see, have other people see. We'd rather not see ourselves. And I think for Maurice, Thérèse is this person who says, like, oh, I see you there. And God sees you there, and I don't condemn you, and he doesn't condemn you. In fact, this is the place where he wants to carry out his work in you, yes. And really manifest his glory in you and his mercy, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I like about kind of Thérèse's response to him constantly, like, looking back over his shoulder with respect to whatever brokenness he's kind of judging himself with, is she's frequently trying to bring him back into the present moment. One thing she says is that we only have the one day of this life to save these souls. She's trying to get him to in this apostolic zeal. We only have this one day of life, and tomorrow is for later, and certainly the past. We've talked about this a lot. Wanting to keep him kind of in what can you offer today, finding joy. She says, find joy in the midst of the trials and combats of life, and just this frequent reminder of bringing him back to the present and what God is asking him to do today, and really trying to reinvigorate that apostolic love with which he first wrote to the Carmel of Lisieux.
And something I think so central to the little way that Thérèse is getting at in these letters is not only is like God forgiven your past sins, but there's a sense in which you can even like see those as the means by which he's drawing you closer to him. So like here's a quote from June 21st, a letter that she wrote in 1897. She says, "The remembrance of my faults humbles me, draws me never to depend on my strength, which is only weakness. But this remembrance speaks to me of mercy and love even more. When we cast our faults with entire filial confidence into the devouring fire of love, how would these not be consumed beyond return?" Yeah, it's just definitely a great lesson, I think, for us when it comes to remembrance of past sins, is how they're not things that we want to completely get rid of, but like we want them to be transformed so that they humble us and like teach us not to depend on our own strength.
And I think the insignificance of them too, in light of what he's chosen. And I think she wants to remind him of that constantly. That stuff, or who you were, or what doubts you have, or struggles you even encounter today, it's insignificant in comparison to what you've chosen and how God has chosen to use you. This is earlier than that. This is February 1897. She says, "Is not your soul the fiancée of the divine Lamb? And will it not soon become his spouse on the blessed day of your ordination to the subdiaconate?" He was soon to be ordained a subdeacon at this point, and so just the way he reminds her, the way that she reminds him of just the need to know that what you have chosen, what God has chosen for you, is much bigger, and all that remains for you is to accept it. And part of that is to not think your sin so great, and not think yourself so great or so big, in comparison to what God is desiring to do in making him little.
Okay, so to put some of this in context, over this period, it's less than a year of October 1896 until she dies, end of September 1897. That's the period of Thérèse writing to and Maurice writing to each other. They write 21 letters to each other during this time period. At the beginning, they're a little more spaced out. It's like one would write to the other would respond a month or so later. But the nuns didn't write during Advent and during Lent, so there were longer periods where they weren't writing. Then we get to like end of June and beginning of July. Thérèse now is getting extremely ill. July 8th, she moves into the infirmary, and they think she might die any day. She's having like these attacks where she's coughing up blood like every single day during this month of July. I think she even receives viaticum at this time. Like they really think that she's at the end. So she's writing, the correspondence picks up a lot during this time period. They begin like, one will write one day and the other will respond like the next day. So they're like a bunch of letters back and forth. And I think because of this increased frequency, Thérèse like really begins to like teach him the little way, because it's more like a conversation. It's like writing every few months is less that way.
Sure. I think Bishop Ahern points out that it's like 60% of her correspondence at the end of her life are these letters to Maurice. And they're substantially longer than a lot of the other correspondence at this time because, and she writes them in multiple sittings, right? Because she is suffering and really dying. So,
also a note I was looking at, if you go online, you can search for Lisieux Archives. It's a great website. They have like pictures of everything. So I was looking through these letters because you can see the photos of the letters that Thérèse wrote. Also during this time period in July, the letters went from being written in pen to written in pencil. So it was like Thérèse was so weak at this point she couldn't use a pen anymore, and she had to use pencil. And you can see how shaky her handwriting was too during this time period. So Thérèse is like on the doorstep of death when they're writing these letters now.
And it doesn't mean that these letters are brief by any stretch of the imagination. She's writing kind of like parabolic examples of teaching methods, teaching tools, and helping him to comprehend the message that she wants to impart to him.
And another thing in God's providence, right? Because now she's in the infirmary, so she's not busy with other tasks in the monastery. She has the time where she can write longer letters. Now, granted, there are a bunch of the letters that she wrote in multiple settings, like over multiple days because she was so weak. But yet it's like she has nothing else to do but lay there and pray and write these letters and write manuscript C. But
I mean, it's amazing, like how much, like you said, the correspondence is very short, and yet there's an intensity and a depth, both in what she's able to communicate, but also in their friendship and how they really grow as friends. So
this is I think, a good image of Therese's little way, and so she's responding here to, this is a letter from July 18th. She's responding again to Therese's obsession with his past sins. And she gives this sort of parable in the letter. And she writes, I picture a father who has 2 children, mischievous and disobedient. And when he comes to punish them, he sees one of them who trembles and gets away from him in terror, having, however, in the bottom of his heart the feeling that he deserves to be punished. And his brother, on the contrary, throws himself into his father's arms, saying that he is sorry for having caused him any trouble, that he loves him, and to prove it, he will be good from now on. And if this child asks his father to punish him with a kiss, I do not believe that the heart of the happy father could resist the filial confidence of his child, whose sincerity and love he knows. He realizes, however, that more than once his son will fall into the same faults, but he is prepared to pardon him always, if his son always takes him by his heart.
it's in that same letter, I think she describes the elevator of love to Maurice as well. It's like with this image of the 2 disobedient children and being punished with a kiss. And she's really patient, right? She says, I'm not surprised at the practice of familiarity with Jesus. It comes a bit hard for you, given his own history, given the time period and kind of the current in the church. We don't get this in a single day, she says, but I am sure that I shall greatly help you. I'd like to make you understand by a very simple example, and that's the example that she gives in this letter. So.
Mm-hmm.
And she's responding to a letter of his in this letter specifically, where she tells him that she's not long for this earth as well, and so he's also reacting to this news that she's dying. And I think it's here too where you start to see, you're going to see all my faults. So it's bubbling up again, all of his reference to his previous sin. But one thing that she says to him in this letter, speaking specifically about the fact that she's dying, she says, I beg you, dear little brother, try to convince yourself that instead of losing me, you will find me. And so I think she's now transitioning into a stage of this correspondence where she's trying to encourage him that I'm about to become even more your intercessor. I'm about to become even closer to you. I will be able to help you even more. But she wants to first prime the pump, so to speak, of teaching him her doctrine, so that she can help him in a special way.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's struggling, like you said, at this time to kind of he knows that she's going to die soon, and he expresses kind of very passionately like how sad he is at losing her, and she responds, that she wants to offer this nourishment that is entirely spiritual, like you said. And so I think he feels alone and left without her, and she just wants to encourage him in that her presence, and also her intercession, right?
And that letter that he writes to her on July 17th is really touching. Like you both mentioned, you see how much that she's come to mean to him. I think he says that he's found a lovely home in her holy friendship, which is a really beautiful image, because here's this young man who doesn't feel like maybe he has a home because of his the death of his mother and being abandoned by his father, and here he's found a home with her, and it harkens back to what they said to each other early on, is that they were souls made to understand one another. So there's really this kinship and close relationship in which Thérèse is assuring him will continue on after her death.
Their friendship at this point kind of reminded me of Chesterton has a great quote in The Man Who Was Thursday, where he says, "There are no words to express the abyss between isolation and having one ally. It may be conceded to the mathematicians that 4 is twice 2, but 2 is not twice 1. 2 is 2,000 times 1." And so I think in Maurice, like he finds, such a friend in her, and the loss of her feels like such a blow to him.
Well, and this harkens to the being the little zero too, right? Could you explain that?
Well, that was in Roland's letters. Do you want me to?
Yeah,
Okay,
I just
yeah.
think it's a good image.
No, I was going through the letters again, preparing for this, and I think in one of the mathematics books that was used to teach children at this time, that Thérèse learned math. They teach the children that like 0 by itself means nothing, but if you put the 0 and make it stand on the right, it multiplies that number by tenfold. It gives it value tenfold. And so in some of her letters to Roland, she talks about being his little 0.
To the right of him.
Exactly. And that standing by his side, I think he even quotes after her death that she multiplies the missionary's effort by 10. Just that having that spiritual intercession and friend, really.
And what's so great about this, I mean, there was a special intimacy between Thérèse and Maurice. There's this great friendship between Thérèse and Roland, but she's that for all of us. Like that's what she sees as her mission continuing when she's in heaven, right? Is she can be all of our little zeros. And so it's like through her love and prayers and her friendship, she's always with us in our journey of faith. And so we're never alone.
The message that she's trying to relay to Maurice and the friendship that we see displayed in their letters is, like you said, on offer today.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, for all of us.
In one of the later letters, towards the end of July, so at this point he's been given Thérèse's photograph, and so he has now a picture of her in his mind, and he has this scrupulosity about now knowing that she's going to die, of her seeing his faults for what they truly are when she goes to heaven. She says, "You must know me only imperfectly to fear that a detailed account of your faults may diminish the tenderness I have for your soul. O brother, believe it, I shall have no need to place my hand on the lips of Jesus. He has forgotten your infidelities now for a long time. Only your desires for perfection are present to give joy to his heart. I beg you, do not drag yourself any longer to his feet. Follow that first impulse that draws you into his arms. That is where your place is. And I have learned more so than in your other letters that you are forbidden to go to heaven by any other way except that of your poor little sister." And she says, "The way of simple and loving confidence is really made for you. I would like you to be simple with God, but also with me." And so really, I mean, this is, I think, one of the second or third to last letter that she's able to write to him, really just trying to nail this down into his head, into his heart, that he is worthy, and he has to remain. His worthiness comes from this message of remaining little and staying close to Jesus as his only treasure.
And such an important message. I mean, it seems like it should be obvious, but it's not. Like when we truly love someone, their faults, their failings don't make us love them less. If we really love someone, that should like make us like love them more. It should draw us to them. And Thérèse says, like God's love and mercy is greater than mine. Mm-hmm. So if my love for you draws me, your littleness draws me even more to you, out of compassion and mercy. Like we just view God as though if there's things that we're going to do that are going to make him hate us or something like that. And yet Thérèse is so insistent that he's drawn to that because he has this great compassion and love and mercy for us.
Yeah, I think she is such a good instrument in first allowing Maurice to understand that he is accepted and loved by her, and then in that kind of human relationship, and then the development of him kind of growing an understanding of that he can also then extend that to infinitely more to God. Yeah.
That friendship that they have with each other was very strong. And Father Pier Giorgio mentioned the photograph. Oh. So Maurice writes to Thérèse asking for a picture of her, and she responds saying like, "Well, I can't I'm not allowed to give you a photograph, but the prioress can send one because just another like fact of what's kind of going on here is each time that Thérèse is writing or getting a letter, the prioress is the one who receives the mail in the monastery. She's like reading all of this correspondence, and I would imagine is very touched by the whole thing. So often she would like, add something to it and write as well to Maurice. So she sends along this photo of Thérèse, and it's funny because I don't know. Do you remember which photo it is? It's like it is. I think it's like not a great
It's
photo.
one of the last ones in the garden when she's like really suffering and Celine's like telling her to stay still and she's like in a lot of pain.
Yes, she's kneeling. She's like terribly sick, and it's the one where she's kneeling and holding the picture of like the holy face. But they had to like the way that our sister Celine is taking the photographs, but the way the photographs worked, they needed to stay still for 9 seconds because the camera took so long. And this was like the third of a group of photos that she was taking. So she's just like almost passing out here. And her sisters in the monastery like make fun of her for the photo because she looks they say she looks very like regal or something. What's the word that they use? Do you remember?
It's something like
yeah,
your great look or something.
Yes, but really I think she just looks pretty bad at this point. So, but Maurice is just so happy to have a picture of his sister.
Yeah, and they exchange in the short correspondence, they exchange a lot, right? The little badge, the photos,
Poems.
She copies out almost all of her poems for him, right?
Mm-hmm. A good number of them, anyway.
I think it's important also, like in this exchange, to realize they send all these gifts. They have kind of affectionate language toward each other, and yet it is very human. But at the same time, there's something this is all under the permission and guidance of Thérèse's superior, right? Who's reading these letters, and I think you look at kind of Thérèse's writing manuscript C at the end of her life and during this correspondence, the later half of the correspondence, right? And I think she talks about, I just wanted to find the right quote. She no longer felt the necessity of refusing all human consolations, for her soul was so strengthened by him who I wanted to love uniquely. And so she really does have this purity of heart, I think, in this correspondence and with God. And I think that's why she can really see Maurice and embrace him as her brother, really. Mm-hmm. So
when she first sees Maurice's photograph, we have to talk about that.
She pins them to her bed curtains, right, in the infirmary, and jokes in the yellow notebook, maybe, right?
Yeah, in her last conversations,
she says, "I am much prettier than them."
Yes. It is funny though, because like the pictures that you see of Maurice, he's kind of scruffy with this huge beard, and
I mean, so just to speak one thing about towards the end of Thérèse's life, I mean, in the last months, talking about September, at this point, her ability to write to him has ceased. But he is constantly on her mind. In one of the passages of the Yellow Notebook on September 4th, the Angelus bells are ringing, and Pauline is with her in this moment, and she's offering intercessions, and the only people on her mind throughout this period are her family, both living and deceased, her mother and father, for Leonie, her sister, who's who's not yet returned to the visitation, for her aunt and uncle, for their children, and then Maurice and Père Rouland, whom I love. So she's in these moments of great suffering towards the end of her life. Maurice, among others, are among the few people who are really being held as treasures in her heart.
I don't think we explicitly mentioned it yet in this episode, and I'm sure a lot of people are already familiar, but like this is one of her childhood desires, right? She lost her brothers who died before her very young, and she was convinced that one of them or both would have mounted the altar, right, and been priests and been missionaries. And so she writes how this like fulfills one of these impossible dreams. Like there's no way that this could happen when she receives these two spiritual brothers. And I think she integrates them, I think, into the family, like kind of what you're alluding to. And even after she dies, Maurice corresponds with her sisters.
Most of those letters are lost, but
exactly,
from what we understand, there's many, many, many letters between Pauline and Marie and
Celine.
Maurice, and some even with Celine.
Yeah, exactly.
And so one of the last few pages of the Yellow Notebook, in the last days of her life, though, September 21st, so we're only about a week until she dies, she's talking with her sister Pauline, and it's not clear what they're talking about, but in this conversation, Marie says something about little Thérèse, and she interjects and says, he calls me little Thérèse. And Pauline says, who? She says, well, Father Bellière calls me little Thérèse, little Thérèse. And Pauline, right, he had just written her, and I wanted to read his letter to her. And so she was thinking about him even in these last days as well. So just an interesting thing how he would even come up in the course of their conversation towards the end of her life.
Right, because at this time, the last letter that she writes to him is in like midway through August, but she doesn't die till the end of September, but she's too weak at that point to write it any longer. So looking at the correspondence, you could get the impression as though like that was the end, that she wasn't thinking about him. But as you mentioned, the last conversation he comes up. Also, there was at least one letter that she dictated to one of her sisters to write that was sent to him that I think was lost. But so she continued this correspondence, and then of course he continued to correspond to her, not knowing when she was going to die, and in fact like writes her a letter basically as she's like at the very end of her life.
Right. I think he writes the day after she dies when he doesn't find out until the 14th of October, right?
Because he's now in.
Yeah, it is. The timing is actually very beautiful, right? Because he's received permission with the White Fathers, right, to go to be a missionary in Africa. And so this is the day that he's making the transit across the Mediterranean, is the day that Thérèse dies. So she is in some sense able to meet him spiritually there. And he writes in his letters to Mother Marie de Gonzaga and to Mother Agnes just how he feels that he's really convicted in some sense by that she's present with him, even bold enough to be like, never again shall I doubt my salvation. Like he's so convicted about her friendship and her intercession. She will always be with me here below at every conquest and victory. So.
And so he doesn't even know. I mean, he knows that she's dying. He knows that it could have happened, but he doesn't know for sure. In writing this on October 2nd. And this is the point of my research and rereading these letters where water started coming from my eyes. I don't know why. It must have been allergies, but
it's really strange. Yeah.
He quotes from Living on Love in this letter of October 2nd, referring to a passage. I think it's in stanza 8 of Living on Love, where she refers to the sails that will. He calls her, quoting the poem, "She was the sails that got me across the ocean."
Yes.
And he means it in more way than one, literally having just crossed the Mediterranean, but figuratively and bringing him in a real sense to his arrival in his vocation.
There's also an interesting, you mentioned like some of the beauty of the timing of everything. There's also a beautiful account from, I think it was Celine, Therese's sister, of right after, so Thérèse dies about 7:30 in the evening, and Celine goes outside just like crying after her sister has died, and it's kind of raining, and her sister recounts how then like the kind of clouds kind of opened up and she could see the stars. Well, in a letter shortly after that, Maurice is recounting, like after he's heard that she's died, he recounts that same night he had been out on the ship or the boat going, traveling to Africa, and he had looked up at the stars and was praying for Thérèse as well. So just kind of this beautiful connection here of at the moment of Therese's death.
Yeah, and then she greets him. Yeah, so she dies on the 30th. Sorry, I want to clarify. And
Yes.
then and that's when he's making the transit, and so she's able to greet him.
She departs on the same day that he departs.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So his first day as a missionary, right, is her first day in heaven. So.
As a missionary.
As a missionary with him.
Yes. Yeah.
And so definitely that union of apostolic charity that I think characterizes their relationship is there in a significant way, in a way that we can point to in writing, certainly at the end of Therese's life and at the beginning of his vocation.
Yeah. Okay, I want to run through the end of his life now, because there's so much more to the story here after Therese's death that I think is extremely important. So he departs for Northern Africa to be a missionary. He arrives there. He has a year-long novitiate. and then he goes to Carthage, where he does his 3 years of seminary studies. And during this time, he continues to correspond with the sisters in Lisieux. He's receiving actually a lot of the, like as they're working on Story of a Soul, he's receiving like manuscripts and reading them, like very touched by what it is that Thérèse has written. But he's getting this greater sense, and they are too, of just like how important she's going to be for the church.
He writes to Mother Agnes, I think it's in November, so maybe a little over a month since Thérèse died. And I think I think at this point he's already read Story of a Soul. So it must have been, I think
it was it might have been December.
Well, in any case, so just a few months. So it was one of the first, it was shortly after Thérèse died that Maurice received kind of a package of a very early copy of Story of a Soul. And I think you can imagine him reading the story of the life of this nun whom he cherished so much, and really getting to know her in a way. I mean, it's so touching in so many respects. The idea of him knowing her only through these letters, and yet that touching him, just having so much a profound influence on him, and then him being able to read her whole story from her perspective, I think must have just been overwhelming. It must have been overwhelming for
including
him.
the parts that she wrote about him, right?
Yeah, that was something that touched him.
Yeah, exactly. He's quoting her. He's always quoting her especially after she dies, right? Her poems, her manuscript, different manuscripts. He's quoting and really kind of taken on again some of her language and understanding in his own spiritual life. It's really beautiful.
But she promised him that he would suffer, and suffer he did.
Yes. So, I mean, already at this time, I think when he's in seminary, he begins having poor health, because he writes at one point thinking that he maybe won't even make it to ordination, because he writes to the Carmel and Lisieux asking for their prayers that because he's so sick, he may not make it to ordination. But he is ordained a priest in 1901, so that would have been about nearly 4 years after Thérèse's death. And he has his first mass at a Carmel in North Africa, which is, a good connection there. And then eventually he goes back to France for a short time before he's sent out on mission. And he would have stopped by the Carmel in Lisieux and said a mass there as well.
Yeah, so he receives his first assignment as a priest, which is to go work in the bishop's office. I think his knowledge of English, yeah.
But this is in Northern Africa.
In Northern Africa, yeah. So he leaves, and he's with the bishop for about a year, right? I think there's another, Bishop Aaron points out, Charles Ifico actually walks into that office while he's there. So it's, again, we see the beautiful kind of weaving together of saints' lives here. And then finally in after a year there with the bishop, he is going to be sent on his real missionary, journey, I guess, into kind of the heart of Africa, really.
And they speculate, perhaps the first year his assignment was because of his poor health as well. They weren't sure if he was ready to go off into, the real mission territory. Granted, he's in Northern Africa. It's still a mission, but we see just how, wild the missionary journey was when he finally leaves on it. They travel, he's just trying to get down to southern central Africa, and they go on this crazy long journey. It's how many days?
67 days, I think, to get to Tanzania. You're like, wow. Yeah, I would have.
Going by boat, and then they arrive there, and then they're having to
machete their way through the forest.
Their way through the jungle, and
they build their house. They're all the structures they build themselves, right?
And
the missionaries and
getting attacked by all kinds of bugs, mosquitoes. They're they can never even rest because there's just mosquitoes biting them all the time, and they wake up to the sound of. If they do fall asleep, then they wake up to the sound of hyenas and lions roaring, and it sounds pretty frightening, I think.
No, I think it really does illustrate the amount of courage she had. I certainly wouldn't want to endure those conditions, but just the journey alone, and then the living conditions, and just knowing that it's hard, I think, for us to conceive. We have such a globalized world. It's very easy to travel. Just how they're sleeping on planks. They don't know that they have to learn the language from scratch as they're trying to catechize the people there. And so it takes an extreme amount of tenacity, I think, and real you really have to be called to that life, I think, and really have that that desire to spread the gospel in that way.
There's an interesting letter that was discovered recently, I think in 1997. It was a letter that he wrote to one of his priest friends in 1903. So this was like when he was like right at the beginning of this time as in this mission territory. He's like recounting what's happening each day, but it's also when he thinks he might die because he gets extremely sick from black water fever, which again sounds like a terrible thing because it says your urine is just like totally black. And yeah, he was stuck in bed for many days, and he said 1 out of every 100 survive this. So he feels like there's a good chance he's going to die.
Yeah. And miraculously he survives, right? I think he recognizes the signs soon enough that he can kind of get in bed and do the requirements of whatever, kind of medicine they had that day, in those days, to kind of fight it. Yeah, and I think another aspect of his time in the missions is just his relationship with his brothers, his superiors, and kind of navigating all of I think some of the letters kind of allude to this. I mean, he's not perfect always. Some people leave really kind of nice accounts of what it was like, about his virtues and what it was like to live with him as a brother. And then other people, I think some of his superiors even had some issues, I think, with his performance and seeing his struggles, not just in terms of health, but how he related. And
yeah, and this kind of eventually leads him to somewhat of a breaking point, right? Because it sounds like he gets sent on a year-long journey with a bishop, and the bishop was really hard on him. And it's funny because it's like Maurice went through all of this. He survived all of this in like years in the jungle and the illness and the food and the language and all
Bishops.
this. And then it's the
bishop that kills him. No,
that
I'm just
finally
kidding.
breaks him. Yeah. No, but it's the relationship with his own brothers that eventually seems to kind of do him in.
Yeah, I mean, I think the demands were, I think, just on a natural level, like extreme. And then he comes up again with this assignment with this bishop who is very demanding on him and has this particular vision of what it means to be a missionary.
Right.
And Maurice doesn't live up to that. And so there's tension there and conflict.
So he leaves without permission. He goes back to France, and eventually he has to make his way back to northern Africa because he needs to clear things up, and I think he's asking for, in a sense, a new assignment because the situation with the bishop, I think he was in present-day Malawi, he was in Tanzania, so that part of Africa, it's just become too hard for him and too much for him. There's also a sense in which when he goes back to northern Africa, that some symptoms of something that probably happened from this time that he's in East and Central Africa, because he begins to show some further health issues and deterioration of health as a result of what's considered possibly to be kind of the sleeping sickness.
He gets like called back to the mother house, basically, the community council. This is in Algiers, so it's in northern Africa. And they basically, he's getting called back because he left the mission early, and they're going to like give judgment basically on him. And so this is their response. The explanations given by Père Bellière indicate that he acted with an astonishing flightiness and unconsciousness, and without taking account of the seriousness of his action. The council therefore acknowledges extenuating circumstances and does not impose dismissal from the society. However, to provide an example and to maintain discipline, it decides that this father shall be sent back to his mission, despite the humiliation which he can feel from returning to confreres who are aware of his unjustified departure. So they are acknowledging there that like there's something wrong with him. I mean, extenuating circumstances that have made him to act in this strange way. And because of that, they're not going to dismiss him from his religious community. But they do say that he's got to go back to the mission.
He's unable to go back, however, because it's around this time that his health really starts to deteriorate from what we think is the sleeping sickness, which comes from the bite of the tsetse fly that takes many years for it to kind of begin to show, or it can take many years for it to show symptoms. And so he's basically going from place to place within the society to regain his health, and ultimately is unable to.
Yeah, I guess eventually he's sent to a sanitarium in Belgium with the society and then sent back to Normandy. And I think it's probably a period of incredible suffering for him. His mother dies at that point in time.
Right. He moves back in with his mom.
Right.
She, or really his aunt, right? But she can't take care of him because her own health is failing. Eventually she dies. So then he's on his own, living in her house. And eventually he kind of just starts like wandering around, getting lost. No one knows where he is. And so his priest friend comes and looks for him and eventually finds him. He'd wandered off, and they bring him to basically a mental hospital.
The same one where Therese's father was.
Yes, another good connection.
Yeah.
Where the same place where Therese's father was admitted. And he's not there for long before he dies.
Just about a month.
Yes.
He's there in the Bon Sever.
So in the eyes of the world, we would say, like, this is a failed missionary who dies alone and in disgrace, and not necessarily in disgrace that anyone else condemned him, but like he had these great bold desires that he did not fulfill, and he was supposed to live this holy way and become a great saint, and like that's not what is the case.
Yeah, like you're saying, the distinction or the contrast between his great desires and like his own weakness.
Yeah, and I think it's an opportunity to look in faith, not just that there's an explanation physically for it. Oh, well, he's ill, and therefore, like, we can write that off and just say, but like to say that like his like his trial and his passion really like represents an opportunity to, in faith, like believe this isn't a failure. This is actually a manifestation. This is a moment of hope and of mercy and of love, even if it's playing out like
a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah, we take in faith that this correspondence, this relationship had an effect. We'd never be able to know for sure, but it's particularly the way that it plays out that lends itself to saying, well, maybe we can look at this in a way that is corresponding to Therese's message to him, in the way that she taught him to see his weakness and his littleness, and to double down on that, to be able to offer himself in littleness, in weakness, in complete lack of sense of control over what's going on in his life, in his community. Even mentally, we don't really know to what effect this is happening and when it's happening in this timeline. We just know that there was something there that had an effect that was very detrimental to his mental and psychological health. And so that is an opportunity that is all a set of context that we can then say that no, this is not what it appears or not what it seems, and is actually, I think, a possible working itself out of what Thérèse desired for him.
Exactly. That it's in the face of the cross, like in the face of contradiction, that there is that we receive in a full sense an invitation to, in faith and in trust, to really embrace in a confident sense, like in this way that Thérèse taught, right?
And that's what makes Maurice like this great protege of. Maurice had this great protege of the Little Way, and maybe you can say something because you visited. His grave.
Yes, I had the opportunity a couple years ago to visit Maurice's grave in Langres-sur-Mer, so which is on the coast of Normandy, just northwest of Lisieux. You can take a train and then a bus there. There's it's a very small coastal French town. It was very charming. And these are the D-Day beaches where the English and the Canadians landed. So it's right on the water, and there's the Church of Saint Martin. It's a 12th century Gothic church. It's really small. It's still the parish church today. And there's a little sign in the graveyard that says this is the arrow to the spiritual brother of Saint Thérèse. And before you enter the church, actually, there's a giant plaque that commemorates him with his birth, the dates of his first communion, his ordination, his founding in one of his foundations in Malawi. Malawi, thank you. And also it's really great, the dates of their correspondence. So when he first wrote the Carmel to his last letter. And so, yeah, there's a beautiful quote there that it's actually a quote of Thérèse talking about what benefit she received from the letters of Maurice. Your letters unite me more closely to God by making me reflect deeply upon the marvels of his mercy and love. So you see kind of even the benefit that she received in receiving him as her spiritual brother. And the grave there has it's very simple, like a marble plaque over where he's actually buried. So.
And it says there that he was Thérèse's spiritual
brother and protégé.
And protégé, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, Amelia. And don't forget, all of you, that the relics of St. Thérèse are currently here in the United States. If you just Google Thérèse Relics 2025, you can find the schedules there, see if there's a place that you can go and visit them. And we look forward to seeing you on our episode next week. God bless you.